Hello and welcome to Double Feature, the internet movie review show where a horror whore and an anime addict swap films to persuade one another about our respective genres. This time round, how you doing first, Alan? You alright?
Yeah, I'm okay. It's been so long.
I know, but then this might be at the end of the video, the ones that we recorded ages ago, so it might not seem like long for them.
It's like some kind of weird tempo.
Unless you put this one up next.
No, that would just be weird.
Then it probably won't seem that long.
It's like the folding of space-time.
I know. My fault, we recorded loads of episodes and didn't put them up. I thought I'd lost the SD card with all of it, all of them in them. It was a horrible, terrible time, but let's get past that now. So anyway, this time round I gave Alan...
Mike gave to me Vamp, the 1986 kind of I want to say like teen horror, but that makes it sound that kind of, actually no, that is it's not. It's not.
Teen,
they are actually kind of slightly older. Yeah, the film is about these two young guys joining this college frat house, and in order to kind of like ingratiate themselves with their new colleagues, they go out and recruit. I was going to say ladies of the night, but they want to go out and recruit strippers for.
Kind of ladies of the night.
For a sexy
although if you go to some strip clubs, ladies of the day as well.
Well, there you go. There you go. In bid to find these strippers, they hit upon this kind of seedy club advertised called After Dark. To get there, they have to enlist the help of a well-heeled loser because he has a car. So when they get there, they don't realise though that the place is actually a nest of vampires led by an immortal Egyptian princess played by Grace Jones.
That's the best. That is the best response to that casting.
Yeah, we'll get to why that is the best response shortly. But the club is basically a front so that the vampires can lure the seedy patrons in. They won't be missed too much when they disappear for vampire chow. So it is then left to our two heroes to try and escape with their lives. Kind of going into this, I thought very much that it's maybe kind of playing off the back of Fright Night, because this was released in '86. I think Fright Night was '85. If I remember right.
It's round about that.
They're
almost contemporaries.
Which I thought was going to, I was kind of expecting this to be maybe a little bit more like Fright Night, and there is maybe an element of that. But it's quite interestingly, the film seems to take a lot from Martin Scorsese's After Hours, which I thought is a really good decision. I mean, that's if you're going to base your teenage horror film on something, After Hours is a pretty
it's a great film.
After Hours is a great film. Yeah, it's can be a difficult film to like in some ways, but I think once you get
Leisure
into
Suit Larry the movie is that.
God, that's bang on.
Huh? Even looks like him.
Yeah. The film does play very heavily on After Hours. I mean, it goes its own way in that it does bring in this kind of teen comedy element. It is very much kind of fusion of the 80s kind of sex comedy with these kind of more serious, kind of slightly gruesome horror elements, and there is this kind of sense of the three lads going on this quest. Even when they drive out into the seedy part of town where the club is, I think is something hits the car and it gets spun round, and then when they come out of the spin, they're in this kind of murky netherworld that is downtown, and I think it says a lot about the paranoia of suburban America at the time, that it's like if you go into the inner city, it's like
stay away from the urban.
Yeah. When they get there, things start to slowly escalate into this kind of, I don't want to say gory madness, but it is kind of heading that way. As one of the three heroes, Grace Jones' character, takes a liking to him and seduces him in quite a memorable scene. Unfortunately, that is kind of the only memorable thing that I think Grace Jones does in the film, because I mean, there's this big thing about this is. I think she's probably the biggest name that's attached to this.
Well, you think about how big a star she was.
Yeah, because this is probably when she was at her most popular. She'd been in A View to a Kill just the previous year as well, but the film takes this rather strange decision not to give her a speaking role. She never actually speaks in the film at all. And I'm not sure if that's right or not. I mean, I can kind of understand, because she's not exactly known for her great acting talent or anything, but she does have a real screen presence, I would say, and I wasn't sold on her, I feel, as much as I should have been. Like, the film obviously kind of wants to set her up as the main villain in a way, but I don't think it quite comes across as well as it could, and on that same sort of tack. I feel the film does go downhill a lot into the third act, where one of the two lads, one of the waitresses in the club, turns out to be a girl that he knew while they were growing up, and she has not been turned into a vampire yet. So, the onus is then on them to save her from the horrors of the night. The girl Amaretto, played by Dee Dee Pfeiffer, she looks good on the screen, but her character is a complete airhead, and I find that kind of annoying in a way. And I think if they made this film now, I think she might be given a much more active role. She would be maybe a bit more gung ho, and she's not quite the damsel in distress. It's almost like, in some ways, she almost seems a little bit oblivious to the situation. But yeah, the third act, I feel like they really don't know where they're going with it. I feel like there's a few awkward shifts in tone during that section. There's a weird sort of jokey reference to Commando, which I thought maybe is a wee bit too far. There's a sudden feeling like, I don't know, maybe they had been through a few rewrites with the film, and there are things that made more sense in like earlier versions of the script or something. I don't mind that it doesn't really explain all the ideas in intense detail, but there's a lot of kind of threads in play at that point, and it just felt like the film didn't really know where it was going with that. But I've been talking a lot.
Well, the funny thing about Vamp is, and I think it was that long ago that I recommended it for one of these episodes, but I loved this film. I remember seeing it when I must have been about early teens, or 11 or 12, maybe early
Probably
teens.
the right age to see this.
And I remember just loving it, and it was a film that just really took me by surprise. And the thing with it is that, you are right, it totally goes, it's a great companion film for Fright Night. It really is. It's got some of that nervous coming of age, horror that's there as well. The interesting thing about Vamp is that Fright Night Part 2, I think this is better than the sequel to Fright Night, but there are actually a lot of things that the two films have in common. Fright Night Part 2 is a college film. So it kind of,
the second one,
and it has this female vampire character as the lead, and she's very sort of animalistic, but she's got a speaking part, here with Grace Jones. I wonder if Grace Jones was so terrible that they just cut her lines,
that could be a possibility.
Absolutely, but it's a forgotten gem that there are. There were so many films. The 80s was a decade for horror. There was so many horror films made. But when you find one that is a bit of a gem, it's great, and I genuinely think Vamp is one of them. It's fun. Yes, it very much is like a horror version of After Hours. It's got a lot of the same sort of lighting. It's the feeling of them being stuck or stranded in this urban area. They can't get out of it. It's kind of like what was the one that Emilio Estevez did as well that was like that?
Oh,
do you know the one I'm talking about?
Yeah, that sounds so familiar. Is it Men at Work or something?
No. It's like Judgment Night or something.
Was that
like
it?
Yeah. And it's kind of got that vibe to it. They go to this place.
Yeah.
They end up getting stranded there. Yeah. But you're like, well, they're in civilization, so they shouldn't be stranded.
Yeah.
There's also the great. I think there's more to the film. Like there's a real. There's a somber note in there which isn't played up on too much, but the idea that the cities and neighbourhoods crumbling, because you've got the old sort of nightclub owner and he talks about the old days and all that.
When it was really great.
And it's like there's nothing else open in this area apart from this strip club, so they've got nowhere to go.
One thing that I did think was kind of interesting is that earlier on in the film they go into like a diner, which I think has been run by a priest, if I remember rightly, and there's this scene where he's like closing everything down, and I think he might actually have a big wooden sort of
I can't remember really. I
think there is a sort of nod to it's like he knows what's coming in a way. It's like it's getting dark and he's sealing up because he obviously knows what to expect. I just would have liked it if they maybe had a little bit of a callback to these kind of things later on in the film, because not only that, but there's a sort of really elaborate opening scene for the film, which
with the fraternity.
Where it's set up like
and it doesn't really come back to that.
Yeah, I would have liked it if they just had a wee bit of a callback.
But that's ringing a bell though with me, that maybe I think I read somewhere that there was quite a lot cut.
Oh, it wouldn't surprise me. Yeah.
Um,
I think if there was a longer version, I'd really like to see it.
also as well, right? See the sort of comic relief sort of sidekick guy that they have, right? Did he not?
Thankless role.
Yeah. Did he not sort of also kind of remind you of the character from The Hangover? I don't know what it was, but you know, and I wondered if they'd seen this film. You know,
could be. Well, I mean,
a little bit of that about him.
I think probably the obvious sort of modern touchstone for this, I guess, would be From Dusk Till Dawn.
Yeah. Well, there's definitely a lot in it, you know, with the sort of strip club and
Yeah.
vampires.
It's in a way it almost disappoints me a little bit that it was Fright Night that got the remake, because I think this is one of the things that if they'd done it right, I think they could have done a lot with the material they had here.
It is to me a film that has been largely forgotten. It's kind of getting rediscovered recently, because I think there was a re-release on DVD recently, and I think through that people have been looking at like going back and watching Fright Night because of the remake. And this is a film that you go on message boards and people are saying, are there any other vampire films? There are other ones as well that are like this. There's one, it's called something like My Best Friend's a Vampire or something like that, or which is a sort of similar, I think, like a sort of comedy.
That isn't the one that had Jim Carrey in it by any chance?
Might have, I don't know.
Jeez.
I don't know.
It sounds familiar for some reason.
But I know, I mean, Fright Night was really, really popular. So I think there were a lot of films that came off the back of it.
Yeah, just try to like, maybe cash in a little bit on that.
But this doesn't feel like a cash in, really.
It's very much its own thing. I mean, I think that's one of the things that's nice about it, yeah. I mean, I think for all I found it a little bit frustrating in the way it goes at the end. I thought, you know, I did really enjoy it.
Yeah.
Because it's even if it's not, it's maybe, even if it doesn't like kind of fulfill its potential, I think it's still very interesting.
Do you think it sort of sets itself up for a sequel though? At the end? Or do you think that, or do you think they would just try to give it, not spoiling things really, but a bit of a sort of cheesy, funny ending?
It's possibly that. I mean, I think I might have respected it slightly more if they'd gone for something a little bit bleaker in the ending. But I mean, I guess at the same time, it again maybe kind of echoes After Hours in the way that it ends.
Yeah. But then, I mean, and another 80s vampire film, Near Dark, you know, it kind of, it's another film that has a lot of problems with like, the ending, you know, it's like very different from the rest of the film.
Yeah,
so anyway, final thoughts on Vamp?
Yeah, no, I was very much impressed with this. I mean, I think, and you know, I'm not even a particular fan of her music in general, but I would say as well I quite like Grace Jones' song that plays in the nightclub scene, and I don't think that's even ever been released on any of her albums, bizarrely enough. It's just quite good.
Yeah, well, I would definitely recommend it, so check it out. On to the next film.
Let's rotate the board.
So, anyway.
It's this week I gave to Mike in a move that I think would have been clever if we'd done this for Halloween, but you know, we're not that organised. I gave to Mike
Vampire Hunter D, which interestingly is a film that I've heard about for years and years and years. It's one of those ones, it's one of those films that when you hear people talk about anime, and like before I started Double Feature I was a complete newcomer to anime really, other than maybe one or two films that I'd seen when I was a kid. And like you hear like Akira and the Studio Ghibli films and things like that, maybe not all of them but some of them, and Vampire Hunter D is one that you know you hear a lot of people talk about. It's a post-apocalyptic tale. It's set in the distant future, and where what's happened is there's probably been some sort of nuclear war, and you've got this vampire nobility who rule the land, and you've got all these other sort of mutants that have been raised by the vampire class, and you've got werewolves, and it's this sort of strange environment where you've got futuristic technologies, you've got sort of magic, but you've also got these human populations that are almost that was my phone going again. That were these human populations that are really reminiscent of like the Old West and of almost sort of aristocratic Europe as well.
Yeah, it is one of those scenarios where it's so far in the future that it might as well be the past.
Yeah, it kind of feels that way. We start off with this character, Doris Lang, who is this 17-year-old girl who really is out riding her pony, she's doing her thing, and she.
I think she's out tending her farm.
Is she?
Yeah,
She's riding her pony. And she basically comes into contact with this vampire called Count Magnus Lee, and he's your total typical Eastern European aristocratic vampire.
He is one step removed from saying, "I want to suck your blood."
We do sort of find out that the house that he rules was Dracula's house. And when I say house, I don't mean
not literally.
I mean the sort of family that he set up.
I think it's the vampire nobility all kind of trace their lineage back to Dracula. I think Dracula is seen as like kind of
that's what I wanted to say.
Kind of I almost want to say like a messiah figure to them.
And also what's interesting is that they talk about their founder as someone who had a lot of honour. And you've got this girl, Doris Lang, who ends up being bitten by this Count Magnus Lee, and really it's about how she hires this vampire hunter who goes by the name D. Don't really know what his name is. It's D, double D. No, I'm only joking. And it's really just about how he is hired to take down Count Magnus Lee. That's really the story. But there's a lot of stuff that goes on in between. What's quite interesting about the movie is you have all these different sort of factions. You've got the Count's daughter. She's kind of in this power struggle because Count Magnus Lee has decided that he wants Doris Lang to be his bride. So he's going to take her when she turns into a full vampire. And his daughter doesn't really want that to happen. She thinks it's kind of disgusting that he's taking this sort of human.
Well, I think it's because she's a commoner.
And also because she feels that that this girl will then be above her because she'll be like her stepmother. So you've got that element. You also have Jinsey. Is that how you pronounce Ray Jinsey?
Let's just call him Ray.
Ray, okay.
Ray Romano.
We've got Ray Romano, this other character who is one of the mutants.
Yeah.
And there's this sort of mutant class which sort of serves the vampires. And it's kind of X-Men gone wrong, really. They have all these secret powers, not even secret powers, they have all these sort of mutant powers, and they can do all manner of different things, and some of them are horribly mutated, some of them appear quite human but have a variety of different powers. And you've got this character, Ray, who just wants to be a nobleman as well, and so he wants to be made into a vampire so that he can be part of that nobility. But at the same time, they're just taking advantage of him to do their, the dog's body work, basically, because they see the mutants as sort of a substandard class, really. So it follows me, and I've not really said much about the actual vampire hunter. So one of the things that's kept this sort of balance in check, where you've got this nobility of vampires, and you've got these pockets of human civilization that are springing up and starting to prosper. So you have this sort of class of people who go out and hunt. We find out that Doris Lang's father was a werewolf hunter and Dee is a vampire hunter, but we also find that the vampire hunter has some sort of mysterious past. It doesn't become clear until the end who exactly he is.
They say fairly early on it's established that he is a half-breed.
Also it's very much like Blade, and you have this sort of half vampire who's fighting the thirst. There's a couple of scenes where he tries to fight becoming a vampire, and it's really just about Vampire Hunter D going out after Count Magnus Lee, trying to kill him before Doris Lang turns into a vampire, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
I
thought you got through that very well.
Thank you. And I really liked it. When it started up, I thought, here we go, another teenage boy fantasy. And as it progressed, I realised that it actually had a bit of nuance to it, a lot more than I really expected, because it really had a vibe of Demon City to it a bit.
Yeah.
But Demon City is far more sort of schlocky than this. Don't get me wrong, there's still a schlock element to this, but I think you could at least make the argument that there's a level of sophistication to it because of the interplay between like I say, Count Magnus Lee's daughter, Count Magnus himself, Ray, Doris Lang, and Vampire Hunter D doesn't really that wasn't really the interesting part in the story
Mm.
for me. It was the sort of interplay between these different characters.
Yeah. I mean, D himself is. I'm not going to say he's a marginal figure as such, but you know, you don't find out. He doesn't kind of reveal much of himself as a character in a way. It's kind of like he's defined by what other people say about him in many ways. It's not even just what what the other characters that he meets say about him. Also, kind of in a way, he has a sort of weird parasitic being that lives in his left hand.
Yeah,
and
I was going to say that the first time you see it, there's like a face in his
Yeah.
hand, and the first time you see this, it's actually really, really comical, and I don't know if it's
Yeah.
meant to be, but it might just be
Yeah.
that with the dub and all that, but it does come
Yeah.
across as quite hysterical, because the dub wasn't great.
Yeah,
It
well,
wasn't brilliant.
It's,
I've heard worse, but I've heard
well,
better.
that's what I was going to say. I think that this is we should probably add that I think we both watched the old streamlined dub of this, which as far as I know is the only dub available for this film, and it's not the best one. I don't think it's far from the worst one. I think the biggest issue I had with it, well, two things actually. I felt that they give it too much dialogue in a weird way. There's scenes where someone will be talking for what feels like an almost unnatural length of time.
Did you notice that there were, like, especially the opening prologue,
Mm.
where you've got Doris Lang meeting Count Magnus Lee,
Mm.
and there's this, like you say, there's this sort of dialogue, and then it's as if they're trying to ram it all in,
Yeah,
and then all of a
there's a
sudden it
feeling
ends,
of that. Yeah,
and and it's, I'm sure in the original Japanese it was far more dramatic.
Yeah, it was probably a lot more succinct as well, I would imagine. It's I've noticed that with a few of the other streamlined productions from around this time, there was maybe a wee bit of sense that they had to get a little bit more exposition in there. I get the feeling that, because I think this was actually, I read earlier on that this was one of the first anime films to be released in the West, just, period. And I guess that
I think
because
it was, I think I read that as well.
yeah, I think that probably because it was so early on in that time that they maybe felt that the audiences might not have responded unless they had that wee bit of a push just to explain exactly what was going on. So there is maybe a little bit more exposition in the English dialogue than you might expect. Or maybe, I don't think I've even actually seen the Japanese, the version of this with the Japanese soundtrack, so I couldn't even tell you how it compares, to be honest.
To me, it was Sergio Leone's Castlevania.
Well, that is it, more or less in a nutshell.
That's my only real criticism of it, is that as much as I say, oh, here we go again, another sort of male teenage fantasy about this, you get a lot of that in anime as far as I can see. About
I think in this one the fantasy is not exclusively male. I mean, Vampire Hunter D has a massive female following. Yeah.
But I think that that it very much is your sort of man with no name type of story, where he comes into this town and tries to sort things out, remains almost silent through most of it, so you don't really learn a whole lot about him along the way, other than a couple of times he's sort of surprised that things are getting the better of him. That's really the only... I don't really think... Well, obviously he's fighting the thirst as well, there's that, but random boob.
yeah, because we were talking about this earlier. Yeah, there is a... It's almost like the scene in Futurama where Leia's been put in the cage by the aliens, and one of them says, "Yeah, can you rip her shirt a little bit?" It is just like that. There's absolutely no reason for that being there.
It's just like, woo!
But I think the reason that was done is that this was originally produced, although it did get a theatrical feature, I was reading that this was originally produced for the home video market at the time, which I think you can maybe kind of see that a little bit. It's just, there was a feeling when the video production started around the mid-80s that you could get away with a lot more on video than you could on TV, or maybe even at the cinema. So there was this feeling, I think, with a lot of productions from that time that, we've got to put in a bit more gore and, maybe some more nudity just for the hell of it, just because we are going to do this, and I think that's exactly what's happened there.
It's kind of strange that just all of a sudden there's like very little nudity, and then within like 10 minutes there's a lot of boobs, and they really seem to sex up Doris Lang. Although I can't really take somebody serious.
Maybe not in the literal sense of that.
Yeah, but they I think they do it to a degree. But so this came out like round about the same time as Castlevania. there seems to be some sort of, there seems to be influence here. I'm assuming it was this that influenced Castlevania and not the other way around.
I think so. I think the particularly the novel for this would predate Castlevania by at least a couple of years. So,
see, when we say novel, right? Was there a graphic novel version of it?
Well, there was a later manga version, but I believe the original novels had illustrations as well by I keep wanting to say Yoshitaka Amano, but I can't remember that's actually his first name. Y Amano, the guy that did a lot of illustration for Square, the Final Fantasy games and such. A lot of if you see the illustrations they used to have that were kind of really kind of ethereal and kind of delicate line work, that was his work. And I think he also worked on the film, but I think this film doesn't really do justice to his designs.
It's not. In places, I felt like I was watching maybe like a TV movie.
Well,
in terms of the animation, rather than watching a theatrical release. It did have a bit of that real Ghostbusters vibe going on again that I talked about with Demon City. But it was okay. It wasn't terrible animation or anything like that. And
I think it's it's a reasonable. They do well enough with it, I think, for what you would expect from a sort of modestly budgeted production in the mid-80s. It's not on the level of something like Nausicaa, but at the same time, I think maybe it's just the direction, but I feel that the film comes across a little bit better than the Fist of the North Star film, which was also directed by Ashida. Yeah. The other interesting thing is that it's
more of a complete film. Fist of the North Star.
Yeah, well, it's more of a compilation movie. Yeah,
and it's just all over the shop. But
well, I think the fight scenes in this were better directed as well.
Didn't get any of that.
It's still not the best example of action direction. I think you really can feel that Ashida has been a television director. I would say maybe more than a film director.
Well, I looked online and it seems to like he directed. Did he direct that Wicked City that you talk about?
I know that's Kawajiri. Well, what I was going to say as well is it's interesting that you likened the film a couple of times to Demon City, because the guy that wrote the novel, Hideyuki Kikuchi, also wrote the Vampire Hunter D novels. Right. So there is a bit of a weird synergy going on there.
My only problem is that, and I don't think it's Vampire Hunter D's problem. I think it's just the fact that you see so many things like this. These characters of these strong, silent male heroes. And when I was 15, I loved that shit. I lapped that stuff up because at 15 years old, that's who you want to be. I always ended up being a complete geek, but that's another story. That's who you want to be. You want to be the cool, silent guy that marches into town, fucks everything up, and then leaves. Right? That's who you want to be. But it does come across kind of. I think it's that some of the anime films that we've done have got so much complexity to them. You take something like Perfect Blue and then you look at this, and really that's a perfect example of how really calling something anime as like a genre, it's not really fair.
Yeah, no, it's. I think it's a big mistake to say anime is a genre.
Yeah, I mean they're animations. You can compare these to anything, but you can compare them to live action films as well. There's no reason not to be able to do that.
Well, I mean, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head when you likened it to a western a couple of times. I mean, it is very much, and I think one comparison that a lot of people make is the film Shane, kind of in a way that you've got that D kind of comes into town and he's not only the sort of love interest for Doris, but he's also kind of the father figure to Doris's brother in a way.
Right. Do you know the film that it reminded me of a lot, and it was released in the same year, I think, was Pale Rider.
Well, that's a remake of Shane.
Pale Rider's a remake of Shane.
Well, maybe not as an absolute remake, but it's takes, like a
it takes some of the sort of Western archetypes, but
well, I think it's based on the same. It's like the story is based on Shane.
Right, really?
Yeah.
I never knew that. I love Pale Rider as well.
I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that.
Look, I love Pale Rider.
One of the things that I was going to say as well, just regarding the English dub, was that as much as I like Michael McConaughey as a voice actor, I think he is miscast as D, because D is usually suggested to be this kind of ethereal, kind of slightly otherworldly figure, and I think as a McConaughey, good actor, but not that kind of voice to him. I don't think he really works for the role.
Okay. So anyway, like I really liked it. I think it's very, very good. I like I say, I think there's just elements of it that are tiresome for me, but that's only because there were so many other films that tread that ground. But even with that, it was still really enjoyable, and it wasn't nearly as schlocky as I thought it was going to be. And I would definitely watch it again. Looking forward to the sequel.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen the film before, but it's been a long time since I've seen it, and rewatching it today, it was a better film than I was giving it credit for. So.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, that's good. So you recommended it to me, and you thought it was shit?
No, I didn't think it was terrible. I thought that I remembered it being a lot more schlocky and maybe a little bit more basic than it was. So I think when the relationship between the human characters and the vampire characters turns out to be not as clear cut as you might first think, I was quite pleased to see that.
We should round this up because I'm about to have an almighty coughing fit.
Okay.
So anyway, both films highly recommended. There's your vampire fix. And you want to save...
Nothing in either of these films sparkles. That is the best thing.
Yes. None of that Twilight shit. Twice shite. So if you have any suggestions, any films you want us to take a look at, please do comment down below. And we will be back next time with some more...
We've already had a few suggestions, so we'll definitely be looking at those soon.
We'll be back next time with some more anime, horror, goodness, fun stuff. Bye! You know your arm.
Yeah, so, well, I was...
You've ruined the illusion, Alan. It's gone now.
You have an opinion on this. I know, but you think about it, if Hayao Miyazaki is like Ha-ya-o, Toyo, To-yo-o. That's all I'm saying. I know. If you have any suggestions on how to pronounce Ashida's first name, please leave them in the comment box below.
Well, just dub over me when you're editing this. Just dub over me with like Stephen Hawking talking or something. Toyo Ashida.